In the spring of 1962, 4 months after they buried her husband, Delphia Halcombe had exactly one thing left worth money. 40 bushels of certified seed potatoes stacked in her cellar, and a buyer from Ohio at her kitchen table with the cash already counted out on the oilcloth. The mine had been shut since the week before Christmas. Every family up that hollow was living on cornmeal and government lard. Delphia looked at that money a long while. Then she went down the cellar steps and gave every last potato away, half a bushel to a house, until her own ground sat bare and her only son packed a grip and left her over it. She never told a soul why she did it. The reason sat on the shelf in that empty cellar for 37 years, in a book her husband never meant for her to find. The buyer kept his hat on in the house, which told her most of what she needed to know about him. He was a heavy man in a good wool coat, and he had come down out of Ohio that morning and stopped at 4 places before hers. His receipt book went on the table, then his billfold, then his hat when she looked at it long enough. He counted the money out in 20s, licking his thumb between each one. "Certified Green Mountain," he said. "That's what your husband's receipt reads. 40 bushel. Come out of Maine through Lexington in November." That's right. There ain't any certified seed to be had this spring. They had a wet fall up north and half the crop went to rot in the sheds. He squared the bills with the side of his hand. "I'm short 200 bushel and I've got growers calling my house at supper time. $10 a bushel, $400, cash, and I'll load it myself." Delphia stood at the stove with her back to him and let the coffee finish. She knew what Boyd had paid, $6.50 a bushel, $260, and he had come home with the receipt folded in his shirt pocket like it was a letter from somebody. That was the second week of November. He was dead the 26th, in the weigh shack, sitting up on a stool with his tally sheet in front of him and his pencil still in his hand. "You're offering me more than I paid," she said. "I'm offering you what it's worth." "That ain't the same thing." He said it plain, without meanness. "Ma'am, I've been buying seeds since 1931. This spring is the best-selling year I ever saw, and the worst buying one. You could hold out on me and get 11. You couldn't get 12. She'd brought the pot over and filled his cup, and then her own. Outside the window, the hillside came up so steep behind the house that the sun did not touch the kitchen until after 10 in the morning. It was 10:30. The light lay across the table and across the money. "I'll think on it," she said. "There's not a lot of thinking in it." He drank his coffee. "You've got no man and no plow horse and a boy that don't want to farm. That seed's got to be in the ground in 6 weeks, or it ain't seed anymore. It's supper." "That's about right." "Then what's there to think on?" Delphia looked at the money. She thought about the note at the bank, $260 due the 1st of July. She thought about how she had $2.11 in a Prince Albert can on the mantel. "Seed ain't money," she said. "Seed's a promise you make to next year. A man don't sell a promise the first week he's offered for it." The buyer looked at her for a second and decided not to argue. He put the money back in his billfold, 120 at a time, and he left a card on the oilcloth. "I'll come back Thursday week," he said. "After that, I'll have my 200 bushel from somewhere else, and I won't need yours." She walked him out. His car was a 2-tone Bel Air, with Ohio plates and mud up the rocker panels to the door handles, because the road up the hollow was 1 lane of creek gravel with turnouts every quarter mile, and it had rained all week. He turned around in her barn lot in 5 moves and went back down toward the state road. When he was gone, she stood in the yard a minute and looked at the bottomland. 22 acres of it, flat as a floor, the best dirt in 3 counties laying between the creek and the county road. Boyd had bought it in 1951 and had never put anything in it but hay. Last fall he had turned the whole thing under with a borrowed tractor and lined it and left it black and waiting, and he had bought certified seed and a new set of plow points, and then he had gone to work on a Sunday to finish his tally and had not come home. She went back in the house and down the cellar steps and got a bushel basket and filled it out of the corner bin and carried it back up into the light to sort out the soft ones. The corner bin was not certified anything. It was a blue-skinned potato with white flesh and shallow eyes that Boyd's mother had carried into that hollow in a coffee sack when she came over from Virginia, and the family had grown them and saved back seed out of them every year since before there was a mine, before there was a road, Before there was anything up there but 2 houses and a mill. 4 bushels of them sat in that bin. They were worth nothing at market. No buyer in Ohio would give her a dime for the whole lot. She sat on the porch step with the basket between her knees and worked through them with her thumbs. And that was where Wendell found her. He came up from the mouth of the hollow with his hands in his jacket pockets. 19 years old, tall, with his daddy's long back and his daddy's way of standing with his weight on one leg. He had been down at the tipple with the other boys, doing what boys did that winter, which was nothing. That was a Chevrolet, he said. It was. Ohio plates. They was. Wendell sat down on the step below her. Mom, he offered $400 for the seed. Her son sat up straight. She watched him do the arithmetic, and she watched the arithmetic land, and his whole face went young and hopeful, and it hurt her to look at. 400, he said. That's what he said. You take it? I told him I'd think on it. What's there to think on? He half laughed. That's $400, Mom. That's what he said, too. Wendell got up and turned around and faced her. A boy from the mouth of the hollow got on at a plant in Detroit in January. They're hiring. He wrote back and said they're hiring every week, and they'll take a man right off the bus if he can pass the physical. Bus tickets $22. I know what a bus ticket is. 200 would set us both up. You could pay the bank, and I could go. And once I'm on, I'd send back. He was talking fast now. 3 months and I'd send back. That's how he done it. Delphia set another potato in the keep pile. Sit down. I ain't a child. I never said you was. I said sit down. You're standing between me and the light. He sat. After a minute he said quieter, I ain't asking for myself. I know it. Then why won't you take the money? I didn't say I wouldn't. She turned a blue potato over and pressed her thumb into a soft place at the stem end and set it in the coal pile. I said Thursday week. That was the last of it that day. He went in the house and she heard him moving around upstairs, and after a while she heard nothing at all, and she knew he was laying on his bed with his boots on, looking at the ceiling and spending $400. That afternoon she filled a poke with 2 jars of kraut and a half-pound of cornbread wrapped in a dish towel and walked up the hollow. It was 2 miles from her place to the head of it, and there were 19 houses on that road, and she had been in every one of them. She had set out tomato plants for most of them and sat up with their dead. She knew which chimneys drew and which ones smoked. The house at the head belonged to a woman whose man had gone to Ohio in October to find work and had sent 1 letter since. There were 5 children in it. Delphia knocked twice and pushed the door open, because that was how it was done on that creek. And the woman was at the stove with a pot going, and the smell in that kitchen was potato peelings boiling in water. I run out of grease, the woman said. She said it flat. She had made her peace with it some while back. I keep the water off the peelings and put it back through with the next mess. It makes a broth if you salt it. I brought you kraut. You don't have to be doing that. I put up 40 quarts and there's 2 of us. It'll go over on me and I'll be sick about it. Delphia set the jars on the table. That's not charity. That's me being tight. The woman laughed a little and put her hand up over her mouth. The youngest, a boy about 6, was sitting on the floor by the stove eating flour gravy off a cold biscuit, and he did not look up. How long since you heard from him? Delphia asked. He wrote in November. He was washing dishes at a place near the plant and waiting on his number to come up. The woman put the lid back on the pot. He'd send if he had it. I ain't worried about that part. No, I'm worried about the part where the school sends them home in April if they ain't got shoes. She said it to the stove. The least one's toes is through the ends of his. I've been cutting the fronts out so it looks like I'd done it on purpose. Delphia took that in and did not say anything to it, because there was not one thing to say to it that was worth the breath. Vester's selling his rifle today, the woman said. He is not. He is. He was down there this morning. Won't sign for the commodities neither. He come out of the store when they was giving out the cheese in February, and he stood out in the road and wouldn't go in. She stirred the pot. 6 young ones in that house and he won't sign a paper. Delphia walked back down and stopped at the store, which sat at the mouth of the hollow, where the gravel met the blacktop, with a gas pump out front that had not worked since the mine closed. Vester Napier was at the counter. He was 38 years old and he looked 50, and he had his rifle laid across the counter with the bolt out and set beside it. and he was watching Garland Teague's hands. Teague ran that store. He had run the Way office before that. He was 54, a smooth-faced man who wore a tie in a coal camp and got away with it, and there was not one person in that hollow who did not owe him money. And there was not one who could say a word against him either, because he had carried them on the book since the 22nd of December. $30, Teague said. It's a Model 70. It's worth $80 in Lexington in October. Teague put his hands flat on the counter. Vester, I've got 9 rifles in the back. I've got 4 watches and a sewing machine and a set of gold teeth in an envelope. Ain't a man in this county buying anything right now but flour. 35, 32, and I'll carry your account through April and not charge you the interest. Vester looked at the rifle a long time. Then he nodded once and picked up the bolt and set it down again, and Teague counted out $32, and Vester folded it without counting it and put it in his shirt and walked out past Delphia without seeing her. Through the window she watched him cross the road. His girl was waiting for him at the fence corner, a skinny thing about 10 with her hair cut straight across, and she reached up and took his hand and neither one of them said anything. And they went up the hollow together. Delphi, Teague said behind her. Garland. How you making it? I'm making it. That fellow from Ohio find you? She turned around. Teague was writing in his account book, and he did not look up when he asked it, and that was the thing about him. He did. He's been to Cutchin and he's been over on Bear Branch. He's paying 9.5 over there. Teague blotted the page. I'd take the 10. I'll keep that in mind. Boyd would have took it. He closed the book. Boyd had a good head for what a thing was worth. Best I ever worked with. And I've worked with a bunch of them. Delphia stood there another second. His voice did not sit right with her, and she could not have told anybody why, and so she bought a box of matches she did not need and walked home. She fried the cold potatoes for supper and ate them with Wendell, and neither of them said anything about Ohio. He washed, and she dried. At 8 o'clock he went up. At 9 she took the flashlight and went down to the cellar to count the seed. She wanted to know it was 40 and not 38 before she said yes or no to anybody. The crates were stacked 4 high against the north wall, wood slat crates with the main stamp burned into the ends, and she counted them twice with her hand on each. 1. 40. Then she turned around with the light and put it on the canning shelf because she had heard a mouse in the wall and wanted to see if he had been in her jars. The shelf was empty. She had carried the last of the canning up to the kitchen in January and washed the shelf down with vinegar water and left it bare. There was a lard tin sitting on it now. It was the 8-pound size with most of the label rubbed off, pushed all the way back against the stone, in the corner where the shelf met the wall. She stood and looked at it for a while with the light on it. Then she took it down. It was heavier than an empty tin. She set it on the top of a seed crate and worked the lid off with her thumbnail, and it came free with a small sucking pop, and the smell that came out of it was old paper and pencil lead. Inside was a roll of bills with a rubber band around it that had gone hard and cracked and fallen apart in 2 pieces. Under the money was a pencil stub sharpened with a knife. Under the pencil was a book. It was a ledger, the cheap kind, with green cloth over the boards and the corners gone soft and furred. She had never seen it before in her life. Delphia sat down on the seed crate with the flashlight under her chin and opened it. The first page was a list of names in her husband's handwriting. She knew that handwriting the way she knew his voice. Small, cramped, the letters leaned hard to the right, the G's with a little hook that never closed. They were the names of the men on that creek, every one of them. Vester Napier's name was on the first page. So was his daddy's. So was the man from the head of the hollow who was in Ohio now, and the preacher's brother, and 2 men who had been dead since '54. Beside every name there were 2 columns of numbers, and a date, and then more numbers, going down the page and onto the next page and onto the one after that. She turned to the middle of the book, and it was the same. She turned to the back, and it was the same page after page after page, the same names coming around again and again, year after year, in her husband's hand. She carried it up the steps and put it on the kitchen table under the lamp and sat down with it, and she did not get up again until the window over the sink went gray. It took her most of the night to understand what she was looking at, because she had to build it out of things she already knew and had never put together. She knew that a man loaded coal by the car. She knew he hung a brass tag with his own number on it so the tipple would know whose it was. The car went over the scales, and a man in the weigh shack wrote down what it weighed against that number, and at the end of the 2 weeks the office paid the man by the ton on whatever those numbers said. She knew that from 1946 until the fall of '58, the man in that weigh shack had been her husband. The first column was a number in the hundreds. The second column was a smaller number in the hundreds. After that came the difference between the two, in pounds, and then that same difference again, in money. It went like this, over and over for 206 pages. Napier v. Check 41, 2,310, 2,140, 170, 12 cents, 12 cents. Delphia sat with her hand over her mouth and read it again. He had not been taking anything a man would notice. That was the whole trick of it. 170 pounds off a 2-ton car once was nothing, was a rock in the load, was a scale that wanted adjusting, was the kind of thing a man might argue about one time and then let go because he had 11 more cars to load before the whistle. It was 12 cents. And it was 12 cents 4 or 5 times a day, 6 days a week, for 12 years, off 63 men. She found a feed store calendar in the drawer and turned it over and started adding on the back of it with the pencil stub out of the tin. She was not quick with figures. Boyd had been. She had to do a page at a time and carry it forward, and twice she lost her place and had to start the page over. The lamp got low, and she trimmed the wick and kept going. Around 2 in the morning she heard Wendell turn over upstairs, and she stopped and sat still until the house went quiet again. She was through the year 52 when she had to get up and go out on the porch. She stood at the rail in her housecoat with the cold coming up off the creek, and she was sick over the sight of it. And then she stayed there a while with her hands on the wet wood, and then she went back in and sat down and picked up the pencil. Because there were things in that book she recognized. 1946 was the year Boyd came home and said the company had offered him the weigh office. She remembered the supper. She remembered being proud of it, and she remembered her sister saying he must have somebody looking out for him, and she remembered getting short with her sister about it. 1951 was the bottomland, 22 acres, the flattest ground on that creek, and the widow who owned it wanted $1,800 for it, and Boyd paid her $1,800 in cash on a Saturday morning in the lawyer's office in town. Delphia had asked him one time where it came from. He said he had been putting back since before the war. She had let that lay because it was the answer she wanted. 1955 was the truck. And 1958 was the year he quit the weigh office and went back inside the mine as a section man for less money, and never said why, and got mad the one time she asked. And after that came the leanest stretch of their marriage, where she took in sewing and he came home black to the eyes at 7 in the evening and did not talk at supper. The last entry in the book was the 6th of October, 1958. At the bottom of that page, in a different pencil, put down later and pressed harder into the paper, was a single figure with a line under it. $6,211. Delphia added her own columns 3 times and came out within $40 of it. And then she put the pencil down and folded her hands and sat in the kitchen and looked at the wall. $6,211, taken 12 cents at a time out of the pockets of every man on that creek. Off Vester Napier, who had sold his rifle that morning, for $32. Off the man at the head of the hollow, whose children were eating flour gravy while he washed dishes in Ohio. And off 2 men who had been dead since '54 and could not be paid back at all. And she had eaten off it since the spring the boy started school. She had canned in a kitchen that was bought with it. She had walked over that bottomland in her good shoes on Sunday afternoons and been glad about it. Under the last figure in the same later pencil, he had written 3 words and then scratched through 2 of them so hard the paper had torn. What was left said only, settled. She sat there until the light came. At 6 she put the book in the flour bin under the flour and made breakfast. And when Wendell came down, she had his eggs on the plate and her back to him. "You didn't come to bed," he said. "I did. Your bed ain't been in. Then I made it up, didn't I?" She poured his coffee. "Eat that before it sets." He ate. He watched her over the cup. 19 years old and not stupid, and she could feel him working on it. "You look sick," he said. "I'm 59. That ain't a sickness." It is the way I've been doing it. She took the pan off the stove. Go up to the store this morning and get me a nickel tablet and a can of coffee. Tell Garland to put it on my book. You don't have a book. I do now. He went. She watched him go down the road with his hands in his pockets, and when he was around the turn, she got the ledger out of the flour bin and brushed it off and walked up the hill behind the house. The graveyard was 70 yards up, in a little bench of level ground with a rail fence around it that Boyd had built himself the year his mother died. There were 9 Halcombs in it, and 3 headstones. The rest had field stones with nothing cut in them, because that was what people could afford when they were put in. Boyd had a stone. She had bought it in December with money out of the burial insurance, and it said his name and the 2 years and nothing else, because she had not been able to think of a thing to put on it that was true enough. Delphia sat down on the ground in front of it, with the ledger in her lap. 16 years, she said. The wind came up the hill and moved the tops of the pines and went on over. You sat at my table. You said the blessing at my table. She was not crying. Her voice had gone down to almost nothing, and it kept going anyway. You held Wendell's hand at his granny's funeral and told him a man's word was all he had. I heard you say it. I was standing right there. She put her hand flat on the cover of the book. You could have told me. Any night. Any one of 6,000 nights you could have sat down and told me, and I'd have took half of it off you, and now I've got the whole thing and you ain't even here to be mad at. She stayed up there a long while. Debt runs downhill on its own, she said finally. Kindness has got to be carried. You knowed that. You said that to me about your daddy. She stood up and knocked the dirt off her housecoat. You said it, and then you never carried nothing but what was yours. She went down the hill and put the book back under the flower. For 4 days, she did not do much of anything. She hoed out the strawberry bed twice. She washed curtains that were not dirty. Wendell asked her twice about the $400, and she said Thursday week both times, and the second time he slammed the screen door hard enough to crack the frame. On the third night, she carried the ledger out to the burn barrel, along with the matches she had bought and had not needed. She took the lid off. She stood there with the book in one hand and the match in the other, and she got as far as striking it on the rim. If she'd burned it, the thing was finished. Nobody was hurt. Nobody knew, and she was a widow in a paid-for house with $400 coming from a man in a Chevrolet. 63 men would go on down that road for the rest of their lives wondering why they never could get out from under, and not one of them would ever look at her sideways. The match burned down and stung her fingers, and she dropped it in the barrel, where it went out in the wet ash without catching a thing. No, she said. She put the lid back on the barrel and carried the book in the house. On the 5th day, she sat down and tried to figure out how to pay it back. She did that on the back of the same feed store calendar, and it did not take long, because there was nothing there. The house and the 60 acres, if she could find a soul in that county with money in 1962, might bring $1,800. The bottom land was worth more than that, and she owed $260 on it, and the note was due the 1st of July. Her truck was a '55 Ford with a bad clutch. The $81 in the lard tin, which was every cent of $6,211 that was left, sat on the table in front of her in a roll with a broken rubber band. Everything she had in the world came to about a third of what he took. And even if it had been enough, she could not have handed a nickel of it to one living man on that creek without saying where it came from. She had thought about that part more than the money. She had thought about Vester Napier standing in his own kitchen being told that the reason he sold his rifle was because Boyd Halcomb had been shaving his car since before the boy was born. Then, about what that would be in the mouths of people by Sunday. Then, about her son carrying his daddy's name into a plant in Michigan. She had thought about it until it wore a groove. On the 6th morning, she was at the table with the seed buyer's card in front of her and the ledger open beside it, and she was looking at the card and not at the book. And she happened to notice that she had written the number 400 on the calendar 4 different times without meaning to. Delphia turned the calendar over to a clean corner. 40 bushels of certified seed. 60 pounds to a bushel. 2,400 pounds of seed potatoes sitting on the floor under her feet. She knew what seed made. Everybody knew. But she knew it in her hands. A pound of good seed cut into sets and put in dirt that has been limed will give you back 8 or 10 pounds in the fall, and more than that in a wet summer. and that bottomland had not had a crop pulled off it since before the war. She wrote it out. 2,400 pounds of seed, half a bushel to a house, 30 pounds to a family, which was 100 foot of row and then some. 63 families. She counted the names in the book to be sure. 63, some of them dead, some of them gone to Ohio, but the houses were still there, and there were people in nearly all of them. Then she wrote the other figure under it and looked at it a long time. 400 bushels. Better than 12 ton of potatoes come September, spread across every table on that creek, dug out of ground the men would work themselves. It was not $6,211. It was not anywhere close to it, but it was a thing she could actually put in their hands, and it was the only thing she had that got bigger after she gave it away. She sat back in the chair. "That's it," she said out loud, to nobody. "That's the only way it works." Wendell came in at noon with the coffee and the tablet and set them on the table. "Garland says you don't need a book because he'll carry you," he said. "He says tell you he'll carry you till the mine opens back." That was neighborly of him. "He asked me, was you selling the seed?" Delphia turned around with the dish towel in her hand. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hoped to God you was." Her son got a cup down off the shelf. "Then he asked me had you been in the cellar." She stood still. "He said had you been down there counting it, because a man buying wants a count before he brings his truck." Wendell poured his coffee and did not look at her while he said it. "I told him I reckoned so." "Why?" "No reason." "Mom, there's no reason. Drink that standing up if you're going to be short with me." He drank it standing up, which is what he did when he was mad, and then he went out and she heard the axe start at the woodpile, which is also what he did when he was mad. She took the tablet down off the table and waited until the axe had been going steady for a while. It was a nickel composition book with a black and white cover. She opened it and found that it was not new. It was his, out of the 6th grade, with 14 pages of arithmetic in a boy's careful hand and his name printed on the inside of the front cover twice, once large and once small. Delphia tore the 14 pages out one at a time and squared them and put them in the drawer with the good tablecloth. Then she opened the green ledger to the first page, and she opened the black book to the first page, and she copied the names over and left every number where it lay. 63 of them, in her own hand, which was bigger and rounder than his, and a good deal slower. It took her until the lights started to go. When she had the last one down, she looked at the top of the page, where a heading ought to go, and she could not think what to put there. Out was not right, given was worse. She left it blank and closed the book. Then she picked up the green ledger to put it back in the flour bin, and it fell open in her hands at a page somebody had turned to more than the others. It was past the last entry. Past the 6th of October, 1958, past 4 blank pages, on a sheet near the back that she had not turned to before. There was writing on it, not columns, sentences in that same cramped hand, and at the top of the page a date, November 26th, 1961. The day he died. Delphi. "I have wrote this out 11 times and burnt 10 of them, and this is the last one I have got in me. You are going to find this book sometime because I ain't going to be able to say it to your face. I want you to know I quit it in 58. I quit before anybody made me, and I have took the difference in my back ever since, and I would take it again. What I have been trying to work out these last 3 winters is how to put it back without it landing on the boy. The bottom land is limed and turned, and I have got the seed bought and paid for out of my own wages. 40 bushel of certified. What I am fixing to do is..." The pencil went off the edge of the word and dragged down half an inch and stopped. Delphia read it 4 times. Then she got up and stood at the sink with her hands on the edge of it and finished the sentence out loud in the empty kitchen. "You was fixing to grow it back," she said. "You was going to put it in that bottom and grow it back to them a bushel at a time and never say a word, and you was going to let them think you was just a farmer." She stood there a while longer. "Well," she said, "you're not going to be able to, so I am." The seed buyer came back on the 22nd of March, which was a Thursday, at about 10 in the morning. He had a flatbed with him this time, driven by a boy in a canvas coat, and he came up the steps counting the money before she had the door all the way open. 400, he said. "I'll do 4 1/4 if you'll help me load. I'm not selling it." He stopped on the second step. Say that again. I'm not selling the seed. You've got somebody else's offer. I don't. Then somebody's told you it'll go to 12. He came up the last step anyway and stood on the porch with his hat in his hand for the first time since she had met him. Ma'am, it will not go to 12. There's growers in 3 states about to put whatever they can find in the ground, and by the 15th of April, certified seed is going to be worth exactly what a potato is worth, which is nothing. I know it. You know it. He looked at her. Then you know what you're doing is throwing away $400. I do. The buyer put his hat back on. He was a businessman and he had 4 more stops that day, and he was not going to stand on a widow's porch and argue theology. You'll wish you had, he said. I expect I will. He got in the truck, and the boy backed it down, and they went off toward the state road, and Wendell came up out of the creek path about 2 minutes later with his shirt wet to the elbows and watched the flatbed go. They loading it Saturday? He asked. They ain't loading it at all. Her son stood in the yard and looked at her. I didn't sell it, she said. She hitched the truck the next morning and loaded 8 crates in the bed and drove up the hollow, and that was how it started. She went to the head of it first, to the woman with the 5 children, and the man in Ohio. She backed the truck up to the gate and got out and let the tailgate down and stood there and had absolutely no idea what she was going to say. The woman came out on the porch drying her hands. Delphi? I've got seed. You've got what? Seed, certified Green Mountain, out of Maine. Delphia lifted a crate down and set it on the ground. 1/2 bushel. That'll make you 100 foot of row, and better. The woman came down off the porch and stopped about 6 feet away, and Delphia watched her face through the whole thing, the wanting it, and then the pride coming up over the wanting it like a shudder. I can't pay you for that. I never asked you to. Then, I can't take it. And that was the moment Delphia had not planned for, standing in a wet yard with a crate of potatoes at her feet, and so she made it up on the spot, and it turned out to be the truest thing she ever said in her life. I'm not giving you a thing, she said. I'm loaning it to somebody you ain't met yet. The woman blinked at her. What does that mean? It means you take that seed and you put it in the ground and you feed them young ones off it. And next spring, when you dig, you save back 1/2 bushel of the best of them, and you don't bring it to me. You carry it to whoever on this creek is worse off than you are next March, and you tell them the same thing I'm telling you, and that's the whole of it. That's the whole of it. I'll write it out and you'll sign it, so it's a debt and not a handout. Delphia took a folded tablet page out of her coat pocket. Can you write your name? I can write my name. She had them all made out ahead of time, 30 of them in pencil in her round, slow hand. Received of D. Halcombe, 1/2 bushel of seed potatoes. Not to be paid back to me, to be paid back in kind, the same measure or better, to another family on this creek in the spring of 1963, or the first spring you are able. There was a line at the bottom. The woman signed it against the fence post, and then she stood there holding the pencil, and then she put her hand over her eyes and did not move for about 10 seconds. And Delphia loaded the crate onto her hip and carried it up on the porch and set it by the door and did not watch her do it. Before she left, she took a peck of the blue ones out of a sack behind the seat. These ain't certified, she said. These ain't nothin'. Boyd's mother brought them in here in a coffee sack from Virginia, and this family's been saving them back ever since. They don't ship and they don't keep past March, and no store will buy them. Best potato you ever put in your mouth. What do I do with them? Same as the others, and save back seed off them every year, and pass them on with the rest. And don't ever let anybody talk you into selling them. She did 11 houses that day and 9 the next. Word went ahead of her. By the second afternoon, they were out at the gate before she got the truck stopped, and by the third day, she had run out of tablet pages and was writing the paper out on the backs of envelopes. Not everybody took it easy. A man on the middle of the creek made her sit at his table for 40 minutes and explain the arrangement 3 separate ways before he would put his name on anything. An old fellow near the schoolhouse tried to make her take a hand-tied broom for it, and she took the broom, because she could see that he had to. And Vester Napier would not take it at all. She came to his place on the 4th day. He was under the porch fixing a piece of guttering with a piece of stovepipe, and he came out from under there and stood in the yard with his hands black, and he heard her out all the way to the end, without saying a word. No, he said. Vester, I said no, and I thank you. Have you got seed? I've got what I saved back. You've got about 4 pounds of what you saved back, because I know what you dug last fall and I know how the winter went. She did not raise her voice. And you've got 6 young ones. I know how many I've got. Then take the seed. I ain't taking nothing off a widow woman that just buried her man. He wiped his hands on his pants. There's men down this creek that'd take it. Take it to them. I've been to them. They took it. You're the only one on this book that's told me no. Something went across his face at that, the word book, but he shook it off. This ain't charity, Vester, she said. It's your own crop. You just ain't grown it yet. That's a pretty way of putting it. It's the only way of putting it there is. He looked at the ground. His girl was standing in the doorway behind him, with a dish rag in her hand, 10 years old, hair cut straight across, listening to every word of it. I've stood in the road when they was handing out the cheese, Vester said. I stood out in that road in February with the whole camp watching me, and I did not go in that store. If I take them potatoes off of you now, then all that was me being late about it. Delphia did not have an answer for that, because he was not wrong. She left the crate in his barn anyway with the paper laid on top of it under a rock. He brought it back at 8 o'clock that night. She heard the truck she had loaned him coming down, and she came out on the porch and he set the crate on the bottom step and did not come up the steps. And the paper was still under the rock, unsigned. I appreciate it, he said. I do. I want you to know that I do. All right, Vester. All right. He stood there another second. Good night to you. She watched his tail lights go back up the hollow, and she carried the crate in the house herself and set it in the front room and went to bed. At dusk the next evening, she was on the porch cutting seed on newspaper when the girl came down the road by herself. She had walked 2 miles. She had the paper in her hand, folded twice, and it had been under the rock all day and it was damp at the corners. Miss Delphi, Imogene. The girl came up and stood at the bottom step and held out the paper, and Delphia took it, and there at the bottom on the signature line, in pencil, in the biggest, most careful cursive that child could make, it said, Imogene Napier. He's asleep. The girl said he works Tuesdays and Fridays hauling for the sawmill, and he sleeps in the evening on them days. Delphia looked at the signature a long time. You know what this paper says? I read it 4 times. Say it back to me. It says we take the potatoes, and we ain't got to pay you, but next spring we save some back, and we give them to somebody worse off than us, and we tell them the same thing. The girl's chin was up. It don't say who has to sign it. No, said Delphia, it don't. Then I signed it. Delphia folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. Your daddy is going to be mad. He's going to be mad about a lot of things this year, Imogene said. This ain't going to be the worst one. Delphia laughed out loud for the first time since November. Then she got up and went in and got the crate out of the front room and set it in the girl's arms, and it was too heavy for her, and she carried it anyway. And Delphia walked the first half-mile up the hollow beside her, carrying the peck of blue ones, and neither one of them said anything at all. You can't eat a promise the year you make it, Delphia said finally. At the turn where she stopped, that's the hard part of it. You have to hold it a whole year with nothing to show. You reckon you can do that? We've been holding a lot of stuff with nothing to show, the girl said. If you have come this far into Delphia Halcombe's story, take a second and hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. That night she wrote I, Napier, in the black composition book, in the 6th column of the first page, and she did not put an asterisk by it or a note or anything else. It went in the same as the rest. By the end of that week, there were 51 names in the book and 11 crates left in the cellar, and the whole creek was talking. The kindest version had it that grief had come on her sideways and she had gone simple. Another had it that Boyd had left insurance nobody knew about. The worst one, which she heard from a woman at the store who thought she was doing her a favor by repeating it, was that Delphia Halcombe had been told by a doctor in Hazard that she had about a year and was setting her house in order. She let all 3 of them run. Any of them was better than the truth. Garland Teague drove out to the house on the 2nd of April. He did not get out of the car at first. He sat in the drive with the window down and the motor running, and looked at her barn lot. where the truck sat with the tailgate down and 4 empty crates stacked beside it. "Delphi? Garland, I hear you're in the seed business." "I'm in the getting rid of seed business." He shut the motor off then and got out with his tie on. He stood by the fender and did not come any closer, and he looked up at the hillside and down at the creek and then finally at her. "That's $400, laying in them people's gardens." "About that. You got a note at the bank due the 1st of July. I know when it's due." "I know you know." He put his hands in his pockets. "I've carried this whole camp since the 22nd of December, and I have not asked one of them for a dime, and I am not going to be able to keep doing it past May." "That's not a threat. That's arithmetic. Every one of them accounts has got to start moving again, or the wholesaler shuts me off, and then there's no store at all." He looked at her steady. "What you're doing is fine, and it's Christian, and it don't put one thing on my shelf. It'll put potatoes on their table in September, and then they can spend their money on shoes instead of grub." "September's a long way from May." "It is." Teague nodded slowly. He walked over to the truck and put his hand on one of the empty crates and looked at the main stamp burned into the end of it. "Boyd bought 40 bushel, he said. He did. 40 bushel of certified seed and a set of plow points, and he limed 22 acres, and he done it all in about 6 weeks, and then he sat down in that shack and died." Teague took his hand off the crate. "I always did wonder what he was in such a hurry about." Delphia's heart went hard and slow in her chest, and she kept her face exactly where it was. "He wanted a crop," she said. "I reckon that's it." He got back in the car. Before he started it, he said, without looking up, which was how he said everything, "Anything of his left down in that cellar, you'd do well to bring it to me before somebody else asks about it. I'd handle it right. I was fond of Boyd. There's 41 crates and a canning shelf." "All right, Delphi," Teague said, and started the car and left. Wendell was standing in the kitchen door when she came in, and she knew from the color of him that he had been standing there a while. $400, he said. "Wendell, you give it away." His voice cracked in the middle of it, which made him madder. "You never sold it. You give it away. Every crate, to the Napiers and to them people at the head of the hollow that ain't never done nothing for us. They done plenty for us. You just never had to notice. I could have been gone." He hit the door frame with the flat of his hand. "I could have been in Michigan drawing a check and sending it back here, and instead, I'm going to be right here in June watching them dig up my daddy's potatoes. Your daddy's potatoes is exactly what they are." What's that supposed to mean? And she was tired, and she had not slept right since the 15th of March, and it came out of her before she could get her hand on it. "Your daddy kept a book of what he took," she said. "I aim to keep one of what gets put back." The kitchen went quiet. "What did you say?" Wendell said. She turned to the stove. "What book, Mom?" "Nothing. I misspoke." "You don't misspeak. In your whole life you've never misspoke one time." He came across the kitchen and got in front of her. "What did Daddy take? Wendell? Tell me." "I can't. You can't, or you won't." "I won't," she said. He looked at her for about 5 seconds. Then he went upstairs, and she stood at the stove and listened to him drag the grip out from under the bed, and she did not go up. He came down with it in the morning at 5:30. She had his breakfast made. He did not eat it. "I've got $22 off the wood pile in the sawmill," he said. "That's the ticket. I'll write when I've got an address. Wendell, you could still tell me." She stood in the middle of her kitchen with a plate of eggs in her hand and said nothing, because there was no version of it she could put in that boy's ears that he would be able to carry into a new life, and because she was proud, and because she had spent her whole life carrying things by herself, and it was too late to learn another way at 59. He walked out. She heard him on the gravel, and then she did not hear him. At 11 o'clock that night, Delphia Halcombe took a 5-gallon bucket and a mattock out of the barn and walked 2 miles up the hollow in the dark to the Napier place and knelt down in the far end of their garden row and began digging her seed potatoes back out of the ground. The ground was soft from the rain, and it came up easy. She worked down the row on her knees with the mattock laid aside, using her hands because the mattock made noise and because she could feel the sets with her fingers. They had been in 11 days. Every one of them had already put down white hair roots as fine as thread, and a pale shoot standing up under the dirt not yet to the surface, and she had to snap those off to get the piece out of the ground. She told herself the arithmetic while she did it. 12 of these families would get through the winter without her half-bushel. Vester Napier would not. But Vester Napier had never signed anything. There was a quarter of a bushel in the bucket already. A quarter bushel would not sell for $2.50 this late in the season, and she knew it, and she kept digging. What she was really doing was making herself a story where there was money at the end of it, and a bus ticket, and an address in Michigan, and she was going to hold on to that story as long as she could. She got to about a half bucket. Then a light came on in the back of the Napier house. Delphia went flat in the row and did not breathe. The light stayed on for maybe 40 seconds. It was the kitchen. Somebody was getting a drink of water. Then it went off, and the house was dark again, and the creek kept on going behind her. And she lay there in the wet dirt of another family's garden, with a bucket of their food beside her. She sat up. She looked at the bucket for a long time, then she started putting them back. She did it one at a time, and she dug each hole with her fingers to the same depth it had come out of, and she set the piece with the broken shoot pointing up, and she pulled the dirt over it and pressed it down with the heel of her hand. It took her better than an hour because she would not let herself hurry it. Twice she had to feel along the row to find where a hole had been. She got dirt up under her nails to the quick, and one of them tore. When the bucket was empty, she stood up and picked up the mattock and walked home. She got in her own kitchen at 1:30 in the morning, and she set the bucket down, and she got about as far as the table. Then she sat down in Boyd's chair with her hands filthy in her lap, and she cried the way she had not cried at his funeral or since, ugly and out loud, with her mouth open, for about 10 minutes. She said her son's name twice. She said something to her husband that she would have taken back if anybody had heard it. Then she got up and washed her hands at the sink and went to bed, and she never told one living soul about that night for the rest of her life. In the morning, she wrote Wendell a letter. She did not have anywhere to send it. She wrote it anyway. 4 pages, and she told him about the seed and about the paper people were signing, and she got right to the edge of the rest of it twice, and stopped both times. Then she signed it and folded it and put it in an empty shoebox on the shelf in her bedroom. By the middle of June, there were 9 letters in that box. Good Friday came on the 20th of April, which is the day potatoes go in on that creek, and has been since before there was a calendar in the house. Delphia was at 4 kitchen tables that week helping cut seed, because she could get more sets out of a bushel than anybody, and because a woman who has never cut certified seed will cut it too small and lose the row. 2 eyes to a piece no smaller than a hen egg so it has something to live on. Cut them a day ahead and spread them 1 deep on newspaper overnight so the raw face dries over and does not rot in cold ground. On Good Friday morning she walked down the hollow and looked at it. Every garden on that road had men and boys in it. There were 3 mules working, and 1 tractor borrowed from a man on the next creek. And everywhere else, it was a turning plow and somebody's back. Women came behind with buckets, dropping sets a foot apart in the furrow. Children came behind them covering with hose. 19 houses. 61 gardens, counting the ones people kept on shares. Delphia stood at the bend in the road for the better part of an hour and watched, and she thought about a man sitting on a stool in a weigh shack writing down a number that was 170 pounds short. Her own bottomland lay across the creek, 22 acres, limed and turned and black and completely bare. The frost came on the 4th of May. There had been 3 warm weeks and everything was up. The potato tops were 8 and 10 inches, dark green, thick as a hedge in the good rows. On the 3rd, the wind laid down at sundown and the sky went hard and clear, and Delphia stood in her yard at 9 o'clock at night and felt the air and knew. She was up at 4. By first light it was 29 degrees and every potato patch on that creek was black. Frost-killed potato tops do not wilt gently. They go dark and slick, and they lay over, and by 9 in the morning the whole hollow smelled green and raw, and people were standing at the edges of their gardens with their arms folded. By 10 there were 2 men hitching mules to turn it under and plant corn. Delphia walked up that road faster than she had walked since she was a young woman. "Don't you touch it," she said to the first one. "It's gone, Delphi." "It's not gone. The top's gone. The seed piece is a foot under the ground and the frost never got within 8 inches of it." She was out of breath and did not stop for it. You turn that under and you have thrown away the only food this family's got coming, and you'll have done it with your own mule. I never seen one come back off a frost like that. You've seen it every spring of your life and never noticed, because it's usually just a corner of the patch and the rest fills in around it. She pointed at the black row. You come back here in 9 days. There'll be new tops on every one of them, and they'll be behind by 2 weeks, and that's all they'll be. She went to 7 houses that morning saying the same thing. At the 4th one, a man argued with her for 20 minutes. At the 6th, a woman who had been up all night with a sick baby stood in her garden and cried, and Delphia stood there with her and did not say anything for a while, and then said it again, quieter. 9 days later, there were new tops coming through the black. That was the thing that changed how the hollow looked at her, and it had nothing to do with the seed. A woman who gives you something might just be soft. A woman who tells you not to plow and is right about it is a woman you go get when your ground does something you do not understand, and for the next 30-odd springs, that is exactly what they did. Garland Teague came to the house on the 11th of May. He came in and sat down at the kitchen table this time, which he had never done, and he took his hat off and set it on his knee, and he waited until she had poured the coffee and sat down across from him. "I'll say it plain," he said. "I'll give you $1,100 for whatever Boyd left in that cellar, sight unseen, and I'll never say the word again to anybody." Delphia did not answer. "You've had it since the middle of March. I know that because you quit coming in the store the same week and you started giving away $400 worth of seed the week after." He turned the cup a quarter turn on the oilcloth. "Delphi, I'm not going to insult you by pretending. I know what's in it because I know what he wrote in it. I was there. The superintendent told me the tonnage had to come down 4%, and he did not care how, and I told Boyd, and Boyd done it, and I took half. Teague said it in exactly the voice he used to say what a thing cost. You can put that in whatever order you want. It comes out the same. You've got a nerve sitting at my table. I've got worse than a nerve." He looked up at her then, which he almost never did. "In '58 he come in that office and laid the tags on my desk, and said he was done. Said it had been making him sick a long while. I could have run him out of this county in a week, and I did not do it. I let him go back inside and load coal for $40 less a pay, and I never said a word to the company, and if you want to know why, it's because I did not have an answer for him. And now you'll pay $1,100 for the book he kept. Now I'll pay $1,100 for the book he kept. Why? He's dead. You said it yourself, there's no law can touch a scale that ain't been read since '58. It's not the law." Teague put both hands flat on the table. "Delphia, listen to me, because this is the part you have not thought about, and it is the only part that matters. That book has got 63 men's names in it, and a record of coal that got weighed one way and paid another. If that ever gets out of this hollow, the company does not go to jail. The company hires a lawyer, and the lawyer stands up and says the discrepancy was theft at the loading end by the miners, and that Boyd Halcombe's book proves it." She sat very still. "There's 2 widows on this creek drawing on their husbands. There's 4 men with dust in them that will be filing before long. And a pension fund that has already told this camp it may not be able to pay out." He leaned back. "Every one of them claims sits in a drawer for a decade while lawyers argue about your husband's handwriting. Some of them people will be dead before it's settled. That is what that book is worth, and that is why I want it in my safe and not in your flour bin." The clock on the shelf went on ticking. "You knew about the flour bin," she said. "I guessed about the flour bin." Delphia got up and took his cup and put it in the sink and stood with her back to him for a minute, and then she turned around. "No," she said, "Delphi, I'm not going to use it. I'd have used it in March if I was going to, but it don't go in your safe." "Then what in God's name are you doing with it?" "I'm paying it back," she said, "a half bushel at a time, to 63 houses for as long as I've got." Teague looked at her, and something went over his face that was almost respect and was mostly pity. "You can't fix 30 years with 40 bushel of potatoes," he said. "No," said Delphia, "but I can get this spring's row in the ground." He put his hat on and got up. "The note at the bank is due the 1st of July, he said at the door. $260. I'm on that board. I know you are. I won't lift a finger against you, and I won't lift one for you either. That's the best I've got." "That's more than I expected," she said, and shut the door behind him. She sold the bottomland on the 26th of June. It went to a man in town who ran a lumber yard and wanted somewhere flat to stack poles, and he paid $1,200 for it, which was a fair price and more than fair for that year. And she signed the deed in the same lawyer's office where Boyd had bought it with cash on a Saturday morning. She paid the bank $260 and walked out with $940 in an envelope. That money never bought her one thing. It went in a coffee can on the top shelf of the pantry behind the vinegar, and it came out of that can every February in $80 and $100 bites, and it was gone by the spring of 1966. And every dollar of it went into the ground on somebody else's place. They dug the third week of September. It came off better than anybody had a right to expect after that frost. The Count Delphia kept going house to house with the black book, and writing down what people told her, came to 410 bushels off the creek. There were potato holes going in behind every house, straw and dirt banked over a mound the old way, because half those families had no cellar. She did not have a garden, and she did not have a bushel to her name. On the second day of the digging, a boy from up the hollow came down the road pushing a wheelbarrow with 2-bushel baskets in it, and set them on her porch and would not say who sent him. By dark, there were 11 baskets on that porch. By the end of the week, there were 30-some, and she had to give most of them away again because she had nowhere on earth to put them. On the 4th day, Imogene Napier came down by herself with a peck basket on her hip. "Daddy don't know I brought this," she said. "Then you take it back up there before he finds out." "He knows." The girl set it on the step and stood back from it. "He said if you say one word about it, he'll deny it in front of a preacher." Delphia looked in the basket. They were blue. "Where'd you get them?" "Off the far end of our row." Imogene wiped her hands on her dress. "There's a piece down there that come up all wrong, bunched together and behind the rest, and every one of them stunted, like something got in it in the spring. Daddy says it was moles." Delphia put her hand on the doorframe and did not trust herself with a word for a second or two. "Tell him I said thank you," she said, "and that I never heard one thing about it." That fall, for the first time since the mine shut, not one family from that hollow went down to the county for surplus commodities. Garland Teague came up the road one more time on the 9th of October, and he did not get out of the car, and he did not turn the motor off. "1,500, he said through the window. "No. Delphia, I have been patient, and I have been decent, and I have got a limit." His hands stayed on the wheel. "If you make me, I will pick up that telephone and tell the company myself that Boyd Halcombe's widow has been sitting on his books since March. And then it will not be me you're talking to. It'll be men from Lexington that never met you." She stood in the yard with her arms folded and did not say one word to him. He waited about 10 seconds, and then he backed down the drive and went. The next morning, Delphia Halcombe put on her coat and took the green ledger out of the flour bin and walked the 1.5 miles down to the store with it under her arm. Past the Napier place and past the schoolhouse and past 4 gardens with the dead vines still laying in them. There were 5 men on the porch of that store and 2 women at the counter, and every one of them stopped talking when she came through the door. She walked the length of the aisle. She set the book down on the counter between the cash register and the jar of pickled eggs, and she put her hand flat on top of it, and she stood there and waited for him to come out from the back. Garland Teague came out of the back, wiping his hands on a rag, and stopped when he saw what was under her hand. The 2 women at the counter looked at the floor and listened with their whole bodies. "You want to come in the back?" he said. "No, I don't. Delphi, I'm going to say 4 things, and then I'm going home." She kept her hand flat on the cover. 1. This book don't leave my house again after today, and it don't get read by anybody, and I'll never speak of what's in it as long as I live. All right. 2. It don't get burned either. Go on. 3. You said there's men from Lexington that never met me. If one of them ever sets foot on this creek, or if the bank ever calls a note on anybody up that road, or if one widow ever gets a letter about a claim, then this book goes on the bus to Frankfurt with a lawyer's name on it, and I don't care one bit what happens to my husband after that, because he's past caring himself. Teague folded the rag and set it on the counter. And 4? 4 is that your initials is in it 11 times in his handwriting, Delphia said, and I never once thought about that until you sat at my kitchen table and told me you took half. The store was quiet enough to hear the cooler. Teague looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she did not expect. He nodded once, slow, and did not argue. "All right, Delphi," he said. That was the whole of it. She picked up the book and walked out past the men on the porch and went home, and Garland Teague never said her name in a hard voice again for the rest of his life. In the winter of 1973, he sent his boy up the hollow to ask if she would come, and she went, and she sat in that house for 2 hours with the door shut, and she came home and never told a soul what was said. The first repayments came in the spring of 1963. They did not come to her. That was the whole design of it, and it worked better than she had any right to expect. The woman at the head of the hollow carried a half bushel down to a family that had moved into the old camp houses in November with nothing. A man on the middle of the creek gave 2 pecks to his own brother-in-law and made him sign a paper which caused a fight at Easter dinner and got told as a joke at that man's funeral a long time after. Delphia wrote every one of them in the black composition book. By the end of that spring, there were 81 names in it, which was more than she started with, and that was the first time she understood what she had turned loose. In October of 1963, a letter came with a Michigan postmark. There was no return address. Inside was a money order for $40 and a piece of notebook paper with 3 lines on it. He was on at a plant. He was rooming with 2 men from over on Car Fork, and he would send what he could. He did not write "Dear Mother," and he did not write anything at the bottom but his name. Delphia sat at the table with it a long while. Then she got the coffee can down off the pantry shelf and put the $40 in it with the rest, and she got the black book and opened it to the page for the coming spring. And in the column where she wrote down who a thing had come from, she wrote W.H. She did that with every check he ever sent. He sent one nearly every month for the rest of her life, and she never spent a dime of it on herself. It bought certified seed in February, hauled up from a farm supply in town, and it went out in half bushels in March. And it went in the ground on Good Friday, and by the fall it was food in a potato hole behind somebody's house. Some years it was 8 bushels. In the 70s, when he was making foreman money, it was 30. The pass-alongs went further than any of it. Families left that hollow all through the 60s, and every one of them took a poke of blue potatoes in the trunk of the car because Delphia stood at the gate and handed it to them and made them promise. Then in January the letters started coming back, because a blue potato does not keep past March. She mailed seed in shoe boxes, wrapped in newspaper postage out of the can. There is a woman in Indiana who still has the box, with Delphia Halcom's handwriting on the lid and a slip of paper inside that says the same thing that paper said in 1962. In the summer of 1974, Wendell came home for 3 days. He was 31, and he had a wife and a boy and a car with air conditioning in it. He stood in his mother's kitchen and looked at the same linoleum and the same stove. "There's a place in Michigan," he said. "It's got a garden lot behind it. You'd have your own room and a bathroom on the same floor." "I know what a bathroom is, Wendell. You're 71 and you're still carrying water. I'm carrying about a bucket a day and it keeps my arms strong." They went round on it for 2 days. On the 3rd morning he stood at the door with his hand on the frame and asked her the question he had come 900 miles to ask. "What book, Mom?" And she stood in the middle of her kitchen. And it went exactly as it had gone in 1962, because she was 71 and set in her ways and still proud, and because she had spent so long carrying it by herself that she had come to think of the carrying as the payment. "There's no book," she said. He was in the car in 10 minutes. He called her every Christmas after that, and he sent the checks every month. And he did not come back. Imogene Napier finished at the university in Lexington and came home in 1979 as the assistant county extension agent. And the first Saturday she was back, she walked up the hollow and sat on Delphia's porch and asked to see the book. "What book?" said Delphia. "The black one. I signed it when I was 10, and I've been thinking about it ever since." So the 2 of them kept it together after that. Imogene brought a second one when the first filled up, and then a third. She put the whole thing on a computer in 1994, and Delphia told her she had no business trusting a machine with people's names. Delphia Halcom got old slowly, and then all at once, which is how it is done in that country. She sat on the porch every March with a paring knife and newspaper and cut seed until she was 91 and her hands would not close right. After that she sat in the chair and told other people how to cut it, and they cut it wrong, and she told them so. She died in her sleep on the 4th of March, 1999, at 96. The woman who found her said there was a full page of newspaper laid out on the kitchen table with the seed cut and spread, one deep to dry, and the knife wiped and set beside it, ready to go in the ground on Good Friday. Wendell drove down from Michigan overnight and got to the house at 6 in the morning. He was 56. He stood in that kitchen with the light coming up and looked at the cut seed on the newspaper and could not make himself move it. After 4 hours of sleep in his old room, he drove into town in the afternoon to the funeral home and picked out the box and the flowers and talked to the preacher. And the preacher asked him how many he thought would come. "There's not many left up that road," Wendell said. "I'd say 11, maybe 15. The service was set for 1 o'clock on Monday, the 8th of March, at the church at the mouth of the hollow. At 20 minutes past 11 that morning, Wendell was standing on the church steps in his good coat when he heard the first horns. The county road that comes up to that church is 1 lane of blacktop with turnouts, and it runs 1.5 miles from the state highway, and by 11:30, it was solid. Pickup trucks. Some of them new, and some of them held together with baling wire, backed up bumper to bumper past the turnouts, past the bridge, out onto the state road and down it as far as a man on the church steps could see. Wendell walked out to the road because he thought there had been a wreck. The truck at the front had Ohio plates and a man about 70 behind the wheel, and in the bed of it, tied under a tarp, was a burlap sack of potatoes. Every truck on that road had one. Some had 1 sack and some had 6. There was a flatbed out of West Virginia, with better than a ton on it, chained down. There were plates from Kentucky and Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and Tennessee and one from North Carolina. And later, somebody with nothing better to do went down the line and counted, and the number he came back with was 311. It took 2 hours and 10 minutes to get them past that church. A state trooper came out from town to work the intersection and ended up with his tie loose, carrying sacks up the hill with everybody else. They buried her 1 hour and 40 minutes late, and nobody minded. Imogene Napier found Wendell at the edge of the road with his hands hanging at his sides. "I put it out Thursday," she said. "I called the radio in town, and I called 31 people, and every one of them called 10. All I said was that Delphia Halcombe died, and if you ever got seed off her, bring a bushel and bring it to the graveside. For what? For the same thing it's always been for." Imogene took his arm. "Come on up the hill. You're going to want to see this part." They stacked the sacks along the fence of that little graveyard, 3 deep and then 4, until the fence was hid and they had to start a second row along the path. The smell of it was dirt and burlap. Old men who had not been up that hollow since the 60s stood around in their church clothes with their hats in their hands, looking at the pile. When the preacher was done, Imogene got up on the low place in the rock wall so people could hear her. "Anybody here needs seed this spring, take what you need before you go," she said. Same terms as they always was. "It ain't a gift and you don't pay her back. You save some out this fall and you carry it to somebody worse off than you, and you tell them where it come from." Nobody moved for a second. Then a young man came up out of the crowd, about 25, in a jacket with a tire company name on it, and he stood there red-faced with everybody watching him. "I got laid off when they shut the last one," he said, "in August." "Then get you 2 sacks, said Imogene, "and get your mother 1. They gave away better than 9 ton of potatoes on that hillside in 1.5 hours. There were men loading sacks into car trunks with tears running down their faces, and not one of them said a word about it. Vester Napier came over to Wendell while it was going on. He was 77, and he walked with a cane, and he had to stand still to talk. "You don't know me," he said. "I know who you are. I want to tell you a thing, and then I'm going to go set down." The old man got both hands on the cane. "In April of '62, I got up at midnight for a drink of water, and I seen somebody out in my garden. I got the light on, and then I got it back off, and I stood at that window in the dark, and I watched your mother dig up my potato row with her hands." Wendell turned and looked at him. "She got about a half bucket," Vester said, "and then she sat down in the dirt, and then she put every one of them back in the ground, one at a time, and packed them down, and it took her better than 1 hour, and she never knowed I was there. I never told a soul in my life until right now. Why was she doing it? Son, you'd left that week." Vester looked at the pile of sacks along the fence. She was going to sell them and send you the money. Wendell stood on that hillside and could not get a word out. I never took a thing off her after that, the old man said. I never had to. I knowed what it cost her, and I couldn't add to it. He started to turn away, and then stopped. That was the last time anybody in this hollow was hungry. I've thought about it every march of my life. That evening, when the trucks were gone and the churchyard was empty except for the tire tracks, Imogene walked up to the house and put 3 composition books on the kitchen table. "These are hers," she said. "The first one's the one I signed." Wendell opened it. 63 names on the first page in his mother's round, slow hand, and then 81 on the next spring's page, and 109 after that, and it kept going, book to book, into the 90s. And down the left-hand side of every single page, in the column headed "Where From," over and over, in that same handwriting for 36 springs, were 2 letters. W.H. "That's you," said Imogene. He could not speak. She never bought a stick of furniture with it. She never bought a coat. Every dollar you ever mailed to this house went in the ground in March. Imogene put her hand on the book, and she never once wrote down that anybody owed her. I looked. In 3 books and 37 springs there is not one entry in this woman's hand that says a person is in debt to her. I spent my whole life thinking she picked them over me, Wendell said. She picked you a place to come home to, said Imogene. It just took you a while to get here. He went down the cellar steps at 11 o'clock that night with a flashlight. The seed crates were long gone. The canning shelf was still there, and it was bare, and at the back of it, in the corner where the shelf met the stone, was an 8-pound lard tin, with the label rubbed off. Wendell sat down on the steps and read his father's book until 3 in the morning. He worked out the columns. He read the figure at the bottom of the last page, and the word under it with the 2 words scratched through. Then the letter that stopped in the middle of a sentence, maybe 20 times over, and then he went up and got his mother's books and laid all 4 of them out on the cellar floor in the flashlight beam. Then he did the only piece of arithmetic that ever mattered in that family. 63 names in his father's book. He went through his mother's books line by line with his finger, spring after spring, and he found 58 of them on the receiving side. Not once. Most of them 4 and 5 and 6 times over 4 decades, and their sons after them, and their sons' families in Ohio. The 5 that were not in there were on the last page of the 3rd book by themselves, written out in a hand that had gotten shaky, with a line under them, and nothing at all beside them. 2 of them had been dead since 1954. The other 3 had left the state before she ever started, and she had never been able to find them. Wendell Halcomb sat on his mother's cellar floor at 3 in the morning and put his head in his hands. She had paid it back, all of it, and more than all of it, in half bushels, in secret, over 37 springs out of a coffee can and a factory paycheck, to men who went to their graves believing that the widow up the hollow was just good to people. He put the green ledger back in the lard tin and set the tin on the shelf where his father had left it, because it was not his to burn and it was not his to tell. He came back the next spring. It was the 2nd week of April, in the year 2000, and he came down with a truck and a tiller in the back of it and stayed 9 days. He put a row of the pass-alongs across the flat piece behind the house, 160 foot of it, which is more than one man needs and about right for a family that is going to give most of it away. On the last night, he sat at the kitchen table under the same light and opened the 3rd composition book to the first clean page and wrote the year in his own name and 1/2 bushel in his own hand, which leaned hard to the right like his father's and was slow like his mother's. In the morning, he went down for a basket to carry the culls out to the hogs. He came back up those cellar steps into the light with a bushel basket on his hip, the same steps, the same basket, and he stopped at the top of them a minute with the sun coming across the yard and the new row laying black and straight behind the house. And he stood there and let himself be where he was. Then he went on out to do the work.